This Saturday, August 29th, join Dr. Michael Salla, Laura Eisenhower, and John DeSouza for a live, interactive online, all-day conference event on Exopolitics and 2021 predictions. You will hear brand new lectures and get the chance to ask your questions live during the Q&A sessions after each lecture. Be a participating member of the panel discussion fighting for your freedoms and talk with other like-minded attendees. Your $49 ticket is an all-access pass to the best material in their battle against the deep state. Just click the link on the Facebook post or in the video and podcast description.
Be the Winterland Ice Arena. Now, the Winterland Ice Arena, the next day, supposedly David Ferry, and I don't have the time to really give you the backstory on everybody. I'm going to assume you know who David Ferry is. He allegedly went there with two teenagers, Alvin Boboof and a guy named Melvin Coffey. Well, Melvin Coffey is an alias. There is no Melvin Coffey. But they never actually went to the Winterland. Well, David Ferry didn't. The kids did. But they went there with somebody else, most likely a guy named Bill Dalzell, but I'm not going to get into him today. These are some pictures of the Winterland Ice Arena. Now, a lot of the information I got on the Winterland is absolutely unseen by any other Kennedy assassination researchers. And the reason for that is because there was a group that I got into on Facebook. It only started in late 2017, and it was just a bunch of people who grew up in Houston who actually went skating at the Winterland ice rink. And so they posted all kinds of pictures. I have so much information and so many pictures and lists of people who are on hockey teams. And like, I know everything there is to know about the people who were frequenting the Winterland Ice Arena. And these people are not conspiracy people. They just wanted to share some cool memories of when they were kids. A lot of the names on the list that I've seen do connect to intelligence, like Marchand and Caldecarone, which is one we'll get to here in a minute. But David Ferry allegedly goes there and meets with a guy named Chuck Rowland. And let me see. Chuck Rowland is not his real name. He was interviewed by the FBI and all kinds of people. They had to have known that wasn't his real name. His real name is Roland Chuck Rowland. He's French-Canadian. But this might really not even be his real name either. I'm not going to go into that too much, but I found about a 400-page FBI file investigating a guy named Charles Chuck Rowland, who was allegedly a communist. The file on him is out of control. And what are the odds that the CIA would be working with two different people or looking for one and having one both named Charles Chuck Rowland? It's a 1,000,000 to 1. That's probably the same guy, but that'll have to do a little more research before sharing anything on. But he goes to the ice skating rink, and one thing that tipped me off, the first thing that tipped me off, it wasn't David Ferry who went to the ice skating rink, was that when he was being interviewed by HSCA or one of those committees, he kept being emphatic about the fact that David Ferry made it a point to be seen. Hi, I'm here. I'm David Ferry. He said he introduced himself at least 5 times as David Ferry. Why would you do that? Well, to make yourself known, to make it people to establish an alibi, right? And so there's so many things that go on in the Kennedy assassination that are nothing more than establishing alibis. Like,
well, it sounds like when the person would call on 9/11, hi, Mom, this is Bob Smith. You believe it's me, right? When you'd hear those weird calls and you're like, that's a really unnatural way of introducing yourself to your mother on a phone call. You wouldn't do that. It seems like an alibi to me. So there's we're seeing that again.
Yes, so I have his strange behavior, wanting to be seen, and then as I'm going through the Dealey Plaza photos, which are still a wealth of information there, most of the good stuff has never been uncovered in those photos because I've uncovered it, and it's like, oh my God, Why hasn't anyone else put two and two together on this? And in particular, because of David Ferry's story, where his story is that he left around 6 o'clock in the evening on the day of the assassination from New Orleans, and he stops in Vincent, and he stops in a couple places along the way. He ends up getting to Houston like 3 in the morning, and then the next day on that Saturday, they go to the Winterland ice rink. Well, I found pictures of Alvin Beaubouf and Leighton Martins. Leighton Martins obviously was using the alias of Melvin Coffey, but also Michael Payne had used that alias as well. So I find these two kids in Dealey Plaza when they're not even supposed to have left New Orleans till 6 o'clock that evening. Slam dunk proof that they were in Dealey Plaza, and that means if they were there, well, David Ferry was there. And I should have included it in this presentation, but I have a photo of David Ferry in Dealey Plaza leaning up against a tree in the background of a photo with William Shelley getting into a cop car. And once I saw that, it was obvious how involved he was, and I didn't have time to put anything with in regards to J.D. Tippett's assassination, but David Ferry was the second Tippett shooter. He's the one who put the shot into Tippett's head before running off. He matches the description. The thing that gave him away was his eyebrows, because he was a U-2 pilot. Most people think he had alopecia. He didn't have alopecia. He was a U-2 pilot, and the U-2 pilots in the early days, because of an insecure aligning of the plane, it basically, because of pressure, caused them to lose all their hair. You can look that up. You can Google that. You'll find a bunch of these old U-2 pilots who were bald, could never grow hair again after they took their flights. That was what happened to David Ferry. That's how deep in the CIA he actually was.
That's what happened to me too.
That's what I was thinking, Yeah. But so yeah, David Ferry is in Dealey Plaza. Those two kids are in Dealey Plaza. He's seen behind the book depository. Descriptions match. He points out his crazy eyebrows. Obviously, he paints them on because he didn't have any hair. Actually, it was suspected that he would paste pubic hair on his eyebrows because when they searched his house, they found a little box that had a number of different pubic hairs in it, like a collection. He basically would molest kids and keep that as kind of a souvenir. He was into like the 13 to 15-year-old boys, and that's basically what the Civil Air Patrol was a human trafficking front. And if you don't believe me on that, just Google Civil Air Patrol human trafficking, and you'll find a bunch of cases over the years of people saying they were trafficked through the Civil Air Patrol. So yeah, the government does traffic people, plain and simple. So Ferry meets with Chuck Rowland. Chuck Rowland gives a story about him. I determined he's not there, but why the Winterland? Why did they go to the Winterland ice rink? Well, turns out that the Winterland ice rink was operated by Mary Boots Roberts and Ronnie Roberts. They were ice skaters. They had been involved with Ice Follies. They were professional ice skaters. They moved around the country. They also worked for the CIA. If you look at Mary Boots Roberts' obituary, which we'll get to here in a second, she ended up going to work for NASA. So when you hear about all these people in the Kennedy assassination going to work for NASA, they did not really go to work for NASA. What they did was NASA was involved with the CIA as a front. When you have your $400 toilet seats, that toilet seat did not cost $400. That money, odds are, went to the CIA because they were a way to funnel money to the CIA covertly. That's the NASA connection there. But the Winterland itself was owned and operated by the Johnson Family Enterprise, which was Lyndon Johnson's family company. And it was the rink itself was built on behalf of Mary Boots Roberts. She was the inspiration for it. Now, you'll find ice skating rinks pop up a lot in not only Kennedy, but other cases involving spycraft. And why is that? Well, two people can go out on the ice rink, and back in the 60s, you could not hear what they were talking about. It was a way you could guarantee privacy. So, and also it was a place that you could bring kids. You could traffic children there, and you would not look out of place by showing up somewhere with a couple kids. So that's really why ice rinks are kind of prevalent everywhere. But
Jesus,
Mary Boots Roberts,
I'm never going to an ice rink again.
Mary Boots Roberts and Ronnie Roberts, they were definitely CIA. Her original name, and we'll see that here, I'll switch over to her obituary. So Mary Boots Roberts, her birth name was Caldecarone. And Caldecarone are you familiar with that name at all?
Isn't that the name that you just mentioned? That the guy?
Yeah, well, Caldecarone, they were a big time mafia family back in Italy. They were like, they would be the equivalent of like one of the New York Five families in Italy. Okay. They were that big. And so her father was Joe Caldecarone. He's got a brother and Joe has a brother named Vincent Caldecarone. And then Vincent Caldecarone has a son named Vincent Caldecarone Jr., by far one of the most important people in American history no one's ever heard of. I don't think I have anything else from this slide. If I need to, I'll come back. This is Vincent Caldecarone Jr. take a look at his face and see if he looks familiar in any way. So Vincent Caldecarone Jr. basically he's in the Navy. He joins the Navy. He gets out. He went to the University of Texas, Houston. That is a big CIA recruitment facility. And if they like you, they send you up to Harvard Business School, just like Jack Valenti did. So basically, he is, seemingly a nobody. When you look at his life, it's kind of uneventful. He joined the Navy and he gets his degree, and then he spends 35 years in the insurance industry, allegedly, but that's not true. I found all kinds of references to him doing other jobs and odd jobs and weird stuff here and there because, well, when you're CIA, that's your job. And whatever front you can pick up, you pick up. So, but he was involved in a case after the Kennedy assassination in '66, I believe, where he was allegedly a witness, possible suspect in the murder of a guy named, oh my God, what is his name? Mercier, I think it was, Mercier, if I'm not mistaken. Well, anyway, it was a big trial. He was a rich guy. He was a homosexual. He lived in Houston. He gets murdered, and it was a big court case. And there's photographs of Vincent Caldecarone all over. Like, they didn't bring Caldecarone into it because you start bringing CIA guys, and then, you never know where that's going to lead when the defense starts to question. But his lawyer was Percy Foreman, who was also the lawyer for James Earl Ray, so there's kind of a connection here. You kind of see that they use the same lawyers over and over. The CIA used the same lawyers, and there's a whole big complicated story around Vincent Caldecarone. But in a nutshell, he is the missing link between Jack Valenti and Raoul, who allegedly set up James Earl Ray. And now, there was a woman back then in the 60s, she came forward that in the 1950s, she was basically trafficked by Jack Ruby and Jack Valenti, and that they were using her to make child porn. And when you look at the timelines and you look at the history, those guys were connected to Carlos Marcello, and Jack Ruby was running pornography from New Orleans to Houston on behalf of Marcello. So it completely fits the timelines. And she basically made statements that Raoul, who was involved with the operation on this child porn operation, she had been in a car with him, and he basically made a comment that he killed Kennedy and he killed Martin Luther King. Now, from what I can tell, he's a support guy. He was not the shooter. He was a support guy. So Raoul was not the assassin of Martin Luther King, but I have a feeling that it was somebody else we're going to talk about who was.
Were Jack Ruby and Jack Valenti were they Mossad?
These guys are, well, here's the thing. When you work for,
are they running something, were they running something similar to what Epstein was running?
Not on that, no, not on that scale. They were, from what I can tell, they had other obligations, other duties, but they were involved in the overall mechanism, right? So they were not the Epstein, but they might have been, Epstein's, gopher, so, something like that. They were obviously running pornography back and forth. Yeah. I have a couple other references to Jack Valenti being referred to as a pornographer by other Hollywood people. So there were people in Hollywood who had a clue of what his history was. But basically, Greta Grabo, G-R-A-B-O-W, she says that, she knew who Raoul was. And actually, I believe it was in the 1970s, her lawyer gets Raoul on the phone, because Raoul had also made a statement that he wanted to make $1 million with Jack Valenti, right? So she calls him on the phone and gets who she believes is him, the real Raoul, on the phone, and she asks if he has seen Jack Valenti lately, and he gets mad. Raoul gets mad and says, "No, I haven't talked to him in a long time. Why are you asking about him?" And so this completely fills in that gap. This here is, believe it or not, this is Jack Valenti's brother-in-law. Vincent Caldecarone married his sister, whose name ended up as Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. Let me see if I have her obituary here. Yep, Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. Now, the way I figured this out was because obituaries usually don't lie. It's family members who write them, and they don't have any idea that what their CIA or mafia activities were, so they just tell the truth, right? Mm-hmm. So when you look here, you can see that she has a son named Tom Caldecarone with a wife, Lou Caldecarone. When you go to Vincent Caldecarone, he also has a son named Tom with a wife named Lou. Duh, they were married. And then we'll see here in the Jack Valenti FBI file, right here where it says relatives listed as Joseph Valenti, father, age 67. Josephine DeGeorge Valenti, both mob families Jack Valenti came from, by the way, mother, age 61, and Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. And this really was a mistake on their part. This is what really put two and two together for me, is you have Vincent here written in the column. You know, when you read FBI files, they put some really good stuff in the columns as notes. And I think I have one coming up I'll show you. But yeah, this Vincent and Lorraine were married. That is Jack Valenti's ex-brother-in-law, because they got divorced in 61, but they were obviously still together as far as Jack and Vincent goes. And so what you have is David Ferry going to the Winterland Ice Arena, which is owned by Lyndon Johnson. Jack Valenti is Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man, had been for at least 5 years. And when he gets to the White House, he's his right-hand man for another 3. So for almost a decade, Valenti is Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man. And so it just so happens that Jack Valenti's sister is married into the family of Mary Boots Roberts, who was the gatekeeper of the Winterland. There's more to that story, and I will definitely get to that. But do you see the connection here? I don't know if I have my slide. This is the connection. Lyndon Johnson and the family, Johnson Family Enterprise has owned the building. They leased it to Mary Caldecarone, whose brother was Joseph. And here's the connection to Vincent. Vincent was divorced from Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. And Jack Valenti was the right-hand man to Lyndon Johnson. It's like a closed loop. It's like, duh. Mm-hmm. Something's going on here. Could it have been coincidence that Johnson owned a building? No. Is it coincidence that Jack Valenti's sister was married into the family of the person who ran it? No. And what gave me that information came from this. I was part of a Facebook group. I always get nervous talking about it. I don't need the world going and bombarding these people. They don't know anything about the assassination. They could care less about the assassination. They're just kind of trying to have, just share their memories. And so please don't go hounding these people if you decide to be so inclined. But this is Joyce Rowland. Joyce Rowland is allegedly the mother of Richard Rowland, who posted this. Richard Rowland's father is allegedly Roland Rowland. Now, I question all these relationships in as far as the Rowlands go, and I'll show you why here in a minute. But this is supposed to be Joyce Rowland, and she relays a story that it was built by the Johnson. Here we go. Her recollection is that the Johnson family built the building at the rink. They owned the multi-story building across the street that fronted Kirby and other real estate throughout Houston. It's very well known. They owned a huge chunk of real estate. By the time Lyndon Johnson got to be president, he was the richest president we'd ever have.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, his family was a 100 millionaire kind of class. And most people don't ever really talk about that. That's why Lyndon Johnson really commanded so much power, because he had more money than anybody. So Ronnie and Boots with the motivation to open it, talks about Chuck Rowland. But we'll come back to her.
Okay.
So David Ferry allegedly goes on this trip, but he doesn't. What he actually did was he flew to Dallas probably a couple of days before the assassination. There were witnesses who saw him in Fort Worth 2 days before the assassination. So he probably flies there. I have the pictures of Alvin Bo Booth and Leighton Martins in Dealey Plaza. I have pictures of him in Dealey Plaza. He is there. He's one of the Knoll shooters. He is most likely the one who did the throat shot. And so when they get to Houston, they made a bunch of weird phone calls. Allegedly, they called WDSH radio. That's false. They called WDSU television because the guy who was working there, who they would have talked to, was Walter Sheridan, who was a CIA agent. They made one phone call that seemingly went unidentified. Well, I thought it went unidentified, and I found a reference to it in the Garrison reports, but I think Garrison is the one who figured out where they were calling, but he didn't really go into the details of why or the significance. But they stayed at a place called the Alla Motel in Houston. And the Alla Motel, it turns out that phone number was to the Gateway Swim and Skate. Now, if you read the reports, it says that he said he went to the Bel Air skating rink. Well, the Bel Air skating rink shut down in '59, and the rink itself was destroyed to make the pool at the Gateway Swim and Skate. So you have him calling the Gateway Swim and Skate. He stays at the Alla Motel, which actually the property backs right up to the Gateway Swim and Skate. Now, why on earth would he be calling this place and going to all these different rinks? Well, because when you look at Vincent Caldecarone's obituary, he was a member of the National YMCA Scuba Program, and so was Jack Valenti. By the way, Jack Valenti sat on the board of the National YMCA, like the top board. And he also taught scuba at the downtown Houston YMCA. The Gateway Swim and Skate later was rebranded as the Houston Downtown YMCA. So basically, they're calling there to try to get a hold of Vincent Caldecarone. That's why they were calling. That's why they stayed at the Ala Motel. That's why they went to the ice skating rink. Because of all the things that we've already talked about, the connection between Jack Valenti and Lyndon Johnson, it was basically a CIA front. And so that is why they were calling him there. And they were calling him there because he was the short tramp in Dealey Plaza. And based on the statements that were made by James Earl Ray identified the short tramp as Raul. This is the short tramp. And if you'll notice, and I'll go back to the original photo just for a second, but on this picture here, look at their faces. They are intentionally obscuring their faces. The old tramp, he's got a big, scoured face, and Vincent is pushing out his lower jaw. He's kind of scrunching his eyebrows. This is spycraft, okay? This is experience. These guys have done this before. They knew they were being photographed, so they did. And when you look at their legs, I don't have a good shot of it here, but Vincent is walking with his legs like totally straight, like they're locked. Like they're altering the way they walk. They're altering their face. They're doing everything they can to obscure the fact that this is who they are. And you don't do that on your first go around. That comes from experience. So this is without doubt, Raul, this is without doubt the short tramp. And the Winterland was really it was the key for me to unlock everything that fell into place. I think I included that slide. Yeah, they're intentionally obscuring their faces, right? You can see it there. They're pushing their jaw out. I have another picture here with a better picture of Vincent. The same thing. Every picture that he's pushing his jaw out, he's squinting. To me, there's pretty much no argument around who this is. Now, for me, the kicker, and this will be the last thing we talk about on the Winterland, and I hope everyone here can see that connection that I just made. We talked about Mary Boots Roberts and how she was the gatekeeper of the Winterland, and I briefly talked about Joyce Rowland, who was the mother of Richard Rowland, who was supposedly married to Chuck Rowland, who met with David Ferry. Well, this is them when you put them next to each other. I'm pretty damn sure that they're the same person. Joyce Rowland and Mary Boots Roberts are most likely the same person. Not besides the fact Mary Boots Roberts, I found at least 3 different obituaries for her with an additional last name. All died around the same time in 3 different cities. It must be a bitch having to go around and kill off all your aliases.